Hey there, and welcome. We live in a world that's just buzzing with political labels. You hear words like socialist, capitalist, communist thrown around constantly, right? But what do they actually mean? Well, today we're going to untangle one of the biggest, most influential, and maybe most misunderstood of them all, Marxism. But before we dive in, I've got a question for you. Have you ever really, truly stopped to think about where you stand on the political map? It's a much bigger question than most of us think, and trust me, the labels are almost never as simple as they seem. If you are curious about all this, a really fantastic place to begin that journey of discovery is 8Values.cc. It's a tool that's specifically designed to help you navigate all these complex ideas and get a better sense of your own ideology. So think of this little explainer as a deep dive into just one of those labels, just to show you the kind of depth we're really talking about. Okay, so here's the game plan. First, we'll explore the world through Marx's eyes and get a handle on his core ideas. Then, we'll see how that theory literally sparked revolutions around the globe. We're going to uncover the many, many faces of Marxism, look at its legacy and its critiques, and then we'll circle all the way back to that big question, what ism are you? Let's get into it.
Right, so to really get Marxism, we have to start with the absolute fundamentals of Karl Marx's thought. See, he wasn't just trying to create a political party, he was attempting to build an entirely new way of looking at human history itself.
The first big idea is something called historical materialism. Now I know, it sounds super academic, but the idea is actually pretty simple. To understand any society, its laws, its culture, its government, you first have to understand how people organize themselves to produce the stuff they need to survive. Food, shelter, you name it. For Marx, the economy is the base, and everything else, the superstructure, is built on top of it.
And that leads us straight to the next core idea, class struggle. Because, see, the way we organize all that work isn't neutral. It naturally creates different groups or classes with totally opposing economic interests. Marx argued that the tension, that conflict between these classes, is the real engine that drives history forward. It's not about kings or great battles. It's about the struggle over resources.
So, in his own time, the age of capitalism, Marx saw two main classes duking it out. On one side, you have the bourgeoisie. These are the folks who own the means of production, the factories, the land, the tools. On the other side, you have the proletariat, the working class. They don't own any of that stuff. The only thing they have to sell to survive is their own ability to work. So what's the big conflict about? Well, it all boils down to an idea called surplus value. The economist Richard Wolff explained it perfectly. The capitalist is basically saying this to the worker. The extra value a worker produces beyond what they're paid in wages, that's the surplus, and that surplus becomes the capitalist's profit. For Marx, this wasn't just business, it was the core of exploitation in the whole system.
Okay, so how does this conflict ever get resolved? Well, Marx was heavily influenced by a philosopher named Hegel, and he saw history moving in a kind of pattern, a dialectic. It works like this. You start with a thesis, which is the current system, in this case, the power of the bourgeoisie. That system creates its own opposite, an antithesis, the growing power of the working class. Their struggle, Marx believed, eventually leads to a revolution, which creates a totally new synthesis, and that becomes the next stage of history.
And you've got to understand, this was not just abstract philosophy for Marx. His ideas were a direct call to action, and they ended up having a massive, world-changing impact. So let's take a look at how this theory actually translated into real-world historical events.
It really kicked off in 1848 with the Communist Manifesto, a little pamphlet whose ideas spread like wildfire. By 1864, you had workers organizing across national borders. Then, in the 20th century, these theories fueled actual revolutions, leading to the creation of the Soviet Union under Lenin in 1917, and then the People's Republic of China under Mao in 1949. I mean, these states would define global politics for most of the century, right up until the dramatic collapse of the Soviet bloc at the end of the Cold War.
Okay, now here is where it gets really, really interesting, and it's why those simple labels we talked about can be so misleading. Marxism isn't just one thing. After Marx died, his ideas were taken up, debated, twisted, and adapted in a million different ways, creating a whole family of diverse and often clashing theories.
And believe me, this list here is just scratching the surface. You've got Marxism-Leninism, which became the official ideology of the Soviet Union. You've got Maoism, which adapted Marx's ideas for a peasant-based society in China. And then you have these more academic branches like Western Marxism or Humanist Marxism. Each one took the original ideas down a very different path.
And just to show you how different those paths could be, look at the contrast between classical Marxism and Western Marxism. The classical guys were all about practical strategy, how to organize political parties, how to win a revolution. But Western Marxism, which mostly grew up in universities, often pulled away from party politics and focused much more on culture, philosophy, and art.
And then you get to a more modern school like analytical Marxism. Its followers kind of jokingly called it non-bullshit Marxism. Their whole goal was to strip away all the dense jargon and really put Marx's core theories to the test using the super rigorous tools of modern logic and social science. The point is, this is not a dead ideology. It's a living, breathing, constantly evolving tradition.
So, given its huge impact on the world and all these different internal debates, it should be no surprise that Marxism has been criticized and argued over from the very beginning. To really get the full picture, we've got to look at both sides of the coin.
The critiques have come from everywhere. The famous philosopher Karl Popper said its predictions about history were so vague they couldn't be proven wrong, making it more like a pseudoscience. Economists pointed to the economic calculation problem, basically saying a planned economy can't possibly work without market prices. Even anarchists warned way back in the day that it would lead to authoritarian rule. And on top of that, other economists have challenged some of Marx's core economic laws. But despite all those critiques, its influence is just undeniable. Marxism didn't stand books. It inspired movements that literally redrew the map of the world. In the academic world, it completely changed fields from sociology to literary studies. And honestly, even if you've never read a page of Marx, you know his ideas. Concepts like class conflict or alienation, that's now a basic part of how we talk about society. And it is still, to this day, one of the most powerful critiques of capitalism ever put to paper. Okay, let's take a breath. After that whirlwind tour, let's bring it back home. We have just peeled back the layers on one single ism, and we've seen just how incredibly complicated it is. So what does that mean for you?
Well, it means that these labels we use are never just simple little boxes you can check. Marxism is this huge, sprawling, 150-year-long conversation, packed with debate and revision and revolution. And you know what? The same is true for pretty much every other political ideology out there.
Which, of course, brings us right back to where we started. Knowing how deep these ideas run, where do you think your own beliefs fit into this whole thing? It's not about finding one perfect label to slap on yourself, but about understanding the incredibly rich traditions and complex questions that shape the world we live in.
And that, honestly, is why a tool like 8Values.cc can be so cool. It helps you get past the surface-level labels and really start digging into the specific ideas that make up your own personal worldview. So if you're ready to continue that journey of discovery for yourself, go check it out and take the test.
I'll leave you with one last thought from Marx himself. For him, understanding the world was never just some academic game. The real point was to change it. And whether you agree with his vision for that change or not, it's a really powerful question to ask ourselves. What is the point of all this understanding? Thanks for joining me.